Hello and welcome back to Indie Book Talk. Today we're talking about something that I feel like is maybe long overdue. We were just discussing it before we got on the call that we get a lot of interesting pitches to our podcast, and it's made us aware that there are some people who are super comfortable pitching and know exactly what to do, and others who maybe need a little bit of guidance on how to pitch a podcast well. So, we are going to address that topic today. And hopefully, the information we provide you here will be useful not just for pitching our podcast, which you are more than welcome to do, but also pitching other podcasts you might want to be a guest on.
Perfect. Because and pitching is hard. It's just like trying to sell your book to people in a really quick blurb. It's difficult, but there are lots of things you can do and things you can avoid.
Yes.
So you definitely want to give the podcast an idea of what you want to talk about, which I think is vital. You can't just say, here's my book.
Yeah, we get a lot of podcast pitches where the person just says, hey, I wrote a book and I want to talk about it. The problem with that is we are a podcast aimed at writers. Everyone wrote a book. Everyone who's been on our show has written a book. Most of the people who listen are either in the process or have already written a book. Some of people have written many books. So when you're pitching a podcast, you need to differentiate yourself. You need to say not just, hey, I wrote a book, but why does your audience, the audience of this podcast, want to hear me talk about it? And simply saying, I wrote a book and it's really good is not enough to sell me on that point because, I mean, we get dozens of pitches a day sometimes. Not always, but like they come in waves and we'll get a bunch of pitches all at once. And all of those people wrote a book. So how do I differentiate between them? We cannot possibly interview everyone who pitches us. We have to make decisions. Your job as the writer is first and foremost to differentiate yourself and say, hey, I'm going to be a great guest on your podcast, and here's why.
And we only get a dozen or so a day, but there are podcasts that I'm sure get hundreds. So depending on where you want to get in, you want to get out of that slush pile. This is the podcast slush pile you want to get out of.
Sorry.
so, so give us something. It doesn't have to be earth breaking, just something, a tidbit that you can talk about or that you're bringing to the table. Maybe a point of view that's unique. Your publishing path was convoluted, or you found a new way to reach out to publish your books that aren't the norm. Troubles you've had that you think you've learned lessons from that you could share with others. There's so many things we could talk about, and I'm sure you've gone through at least one of them when writing this book that you wish to talk about. You just got to find out what it is about that process you want to bring to the table.
Right. Basically, your book isn't a differentiator. Your book is table stakes. We're not even going to consider you unless you're somehow related to books, right? So your job is to say, what about this process is interesting? What did I learn? What did I discover? What do I want to tell people about? What makes me different from the last person you had on the show? And part of doing that well also comes from listening to at least one episode of any show that you're going to pitch.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't listened, if you've only read their little description, you may not know enough to know what kind of person they're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
what kinds of stories are going to catch them, or how to differentiate yourself from other guests they've had and other people that are pitching them. So I know there are a lot of podcasts out there, and if you're trying to get on, 15, 20, 30 podcasts as part of your strategy, uh, that it's going to be a lot of time investment, but you need to listen to at least some of an episode to get a sense of who these people are and what they care about. You can also do that by reading through descriptions and titles of previous episodes. we've mentioned multiple times that neither of us are super into romance, and when we are, we're into cleaner sides of romance, right?
Now,
Uh,
that doesn't mean we won't talk to you if you've
right.
written some erotica, but make it interesting for us, because
Yeah, your
otherwise,
pitch
we're,
can't be "I write erotica," end
yeah,
of
we'll be
pitch.
like, yeah, that's not, no, I'm good.
But if you can say, "I write erotica and I'm a school teacher, and so I have a pen name, and here's how I keep my life and my books separate," then we wanna talk to you. Or we had somebody, didn't we, who wrote erotica who has, like, 4 pen names, and she
Yes.
was merging them back together.
Yeah.
Things like that are interesting to us. And other podcasts may have different criteria, but for the most part, they will tell you that. And you'll be able to see it either from their website or from their page, or by reading through some of their previous episodes and saying, okay, what are the patterns I'm seeing? What kinds of people do they talk to?
Hmm.
On our podcast, we talk a lot about diversity. You know, we seek out authors that may not be represented very well in the mainstream publishing path, because I think that's part of being indie, right?
Hmm.
And I think Shelley would agree that we're interested in those stories that aren't our stories, and we are two white women, so we want to talk to people who aren't that,
Hmm.
as well as people who are that, but like we want to diversify that. We're looking for people from around the world. We've talked to people in South Africa and Australia and Mexico, and I would love to talk to somebody from every country in the world. So like
Oh, that
there's
would
your
be
challenge.
awesome. We could have like a little map board.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'll
I
be our
want more.
2023 goal, is to knock out some more countries.
Yes. So if you're listening right now and you're from somewhere other than the United States, Canada, and Australia, because those are our big well represented countries at this point, pitch us. That might be enough of a differentiator right now.
Yes.
Just say, hello, I'm a publishing and I live in I I've just blanked on every country in the world besides the 3 that I mentioned. Chile. I then that could be enough. But you don't know those things unless you investigate that podcast a little bit. Do not do that thing where you just send out 40,000 pitches to every podcast that has the word book or publishing in the title.
Right. And who just tells us it's award winning? There's a lot of awards, and a lot of people have won awards. What made it win the award? What about it? Did you capture something unique? Did you, I don't know, what about that book made it stand out? Just telling us it's award winning is kind of like telling us you wrote a book. It doesn't tell us anything about you or your story.
Right.
So,
And frankly, for us, and I don't think this is true for all podcasts, but for us, I'm the one who vets the pitches for the most part. And if you tell me something odd about yourself or interesting about yourself, I am much more likely to say, "Oh, let's talk to that person."
because
It's
we're
just
odd.
it's how my brain works. Yeah, we're weird people with weird hobbies, and our little hearts sing when we hear somebody else be like, I can't even remember some of the things that we've had that are just hilarious. And I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you if you are comfortable in your weirdness and you are willing to
Yes.
bring that to our show and make our show more fun.
Please bring weird.
Please
She
bring
knows
weird.
better than to let me vet people, because then if they're like, and then I have this cat, okay, you're on.
Yeah, yeah. Pictures of your pets are not. No, you can't attach things to our podcast pitch. But the point is, your pitch should be more than one sentence.
Mhm.
Your pitch should tell me something about who you are or what you will do for my audience. Because ultimately, I am part of this audience, right? I am
Mhm.
an author. Shelley is an author. Very soon she will have a book out.
Eek.
She's so close.
I
Like
am
I
so
can't even tell you.
close.
So close. And I'm really excited. So like we are this community that we're serving. And so we want people who are going to give us value. And our version of value is different, I think, than some podcasts. Some podcasts are going to ask you how many followers you have on social media. Some podcasts are going to only accept you if you are pitched by, you know, a PR consultant person who coordinates a lot of stuff. We tend to work one to one, and we tend to be really excited about weird and about people who are coming from all different angles. So, and we don't really care if you have a big following because that's not why we're here. We're not selling ads on this show.
Mhm.
Um, but you need to figure out what that podcast values, what they care about, what their audience cares about, and pitch to that.
Right. I mean, the whole reason we started this, one of the biggest reasons was to teach ourselves.
Hmm.
We learned so much from these interviews. I think there's very few interviews we've come away with that I haven't like jotted down a note like I've got to check this out later. And
Yeah,
that's and we're still doing that. So that's what we're hoping to bring to everyone else. So, it doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking, but just some little tidbit that, you could offer up to someone that's struggling with the same things you are.
right. And, I know that this is really abstract and it can be hard to think about your own stuff in this way. So I'm going to give you some examples. I've been on other podcasts besides ours, right?
Mhm.
And so when I pitch different kinds of podcasts, I can give you an idea of what I'm pitching to these podcasts. So, for example, my most recent book, On the Bank of Oblivion, is about a main character who's experiencing chronic illness for the first time, those like first stages of figuring out what is even happening to him.
Mhm.
I pitched a bunch of podcasts that were not book related, but were chronic illness related. So when I went to them, it wasn't, I, I kind of could use my book as the hook, right? I could say, hey, I just wrote this fantasy novel about having a chronic illness.
Mhm.
For them, that was like, oh, that's interesting. Now, if you pitched us a book themed podcast with that, I'd say, okay, so. And so if I'm pitching another writing related podcast, I might say, hey, I want to talk to you about my lived experience and how I use that lived experience in my novel.
Mhm.
Talking about the same novel. I'm the same author, but I'm presenting it based on what that podcast is most likely to value in what I'm offering. And that can make a huge difference. That cuts you through the slush to something that might actually get on the show.
We want the more personal approach.
Yeah.
But also going back to listening to at least one episode, you want to be prepared for what those podcasts have. We have a very relaxed sit around have coffee style. Some podcasts really want you to have some stuff prepared, be able to give like a really good blurb on your book. So make sure you've prepared those things. I mean, we keep it very informal, but we still give options for people to like give their spiels and make sure people know about their works. But make sure you have that prepared. Don't be like umming and awing when you're asked these questions because they're hoping you already have that. You've done your homework in advance.
Yeah.
And make sure what the like I know, Emma, you went on one where it was kind of like how to do this plot kind of book, and I don't remember what the name of the
Oh, yeah,
podcast
that one
was.
was amazing. So it was a podcast where they had like a random plot generator, and then we
Hmm.
would it would give us elements, and then
Hmm.
we would flesh out the story. As the guest, you were like the special guest fleshing out this story live with the hosts. You don't want to pitch a podcast like that unless you are very comfortable
Right.
creating
Yeah.
a story on the fly.
If you're not good at ad libbing and you're going to get all flustered, not your podcast. So
Right. Oh, that podcast, by the way, is Somebody Write This. So
that's right.
you
Yes.
might want to go listen to them. They are hilarious. It's great fun. But yeah, and I've been on podcasts too. I was on one I thought was really interesting. One of the chronic illness podcasts where she knew that her health wasn't always going to be in a situation where she could be on live recordings. So
Hmm.
she'd actually pre-record her questions and had me
Mm.
pre-record my answers. So like I had recordings and I'd hit play, listen to her question, and then record my answer.
Oh, that's
That's a
cool.
very different format. And you have to
Yes.
prepare for it in a different way because there's not that give and take
Hmm.
from the host. So, you do want to be really clear on what is the structure of this podcast. And just listening to an episode can tell you a lot of that.
Hmm. So just a couple of other tips. Not so much about trying to get on a podcast, but when you do get on a podcast, be sure you set yourself a reminder that the date and the time of the podcast you're on, have a setup, your headset, and all that stuff ready to go. Um, because a lot of podcasts and us, we usually schedule things back to back. we don't have 15, 20 minutes to help with technical issues. Um, and if the technical issues run too long, you might get bumped and not be able to be on the podcast. So it's very important to do that part of your homework as well. Be prepared for when the podcast starts.
And if you don't get a message from the hosts saying, hey, here's the technicals you need to know, it's totally okay to message them and say, hey, send an email, whatever channel they used to interact with you in the first place. Just ask, is there anything I need to know prior to recording? We send out an email that we send out a calendar link with a bunch of text in the bottom that talks about this is the platform we use and this is what you need to make sure you're prepared. So hopefully people know that, but we still get people who show up and their tech doesn't work, or they don't have a headset and we get a weird echo,
Mhm.
um, or there's a lot of weird background noise that I think, ideally, you could sit in a closet and not have the background noise. Like there's lots of things you can do, but just really be prepared and please show up. It's, we do
Yes.
this as a passion project, and even if you're doing this to get paid, um, maybe more, especially there, this really messes with your schedule if you have people not showing up.
Mhm.
So that can really set off the production schedule. And I can tell you, if you don't show up to an episode and you don't have a really good reason, it's like a job interview. You're not getting a second chance.
Right.
They don't have
I mean,
time.
it would have had to have been like something we really wanted to hear about, for us
Yeah.
to give it a second chance. And most other podcasts, I'm sure, are quite the same. They book months out. I know some people book 8 months out,
Yeah.
and they're not going to mess with someone that doesn't show up. So it's very important. Um, Treat it like a job interview. Like Emma said, you need to make sure you're there, prepared, and ready to go. Um,
And on that note of booking so far out, we do book 2 to 4 months out. So if you're pitching us with the hope that, oh, like, I want to talk to you during mental health month,
hmm,
you want to talk to us 3 or 4 months earlier if you're hoping to get your episode played during that time, because we're booking out, and then once you've recorded, there's 4 to 6 weeks often before your episode goes live.
mhm.
So it's really, you got to think about it like a retail calendar, right? You don't start thinking about Christmas in November, you start thinking about Christmas in like June, because that's how it works. We have to plan
Mhm.
ahead. We have to be ready so that when, special events do come along, we have that ready to go and slot it in. And we're not going to be recording. We did that once or twice, recording and then
Yes.
editing and then posting the next day, and it's awful, and
Yeah, let's not do that.
nobody who's doing a podcast wants to do that. So, plan ahead, pitch ahead of when you want to be on the show, have your tech in order, differentiate yourself, and please listen to or at least read about a podcast before you go on it.
And if you've got a great pitch that you've done to people, we'd love to hear some examples. Like if you do podcasts a lot and you've got this pitch thing down, share it. Let people hear your some examples. That'd be fun. I'd like to hear what people are saying out there to get themselves on podcasts.
Yeah, I'll happily do an episode that here's some winning podcast pitches. Like, it's cool, send them to us. We'd love to
Yeah,
hear them.
we can
Um,
use ideas. Trust me. All right, I
all
think
right.
we better wrap that up.
Well, so if you do want to pitch us, uh, indiebooktalk.com. There are forms there for book reviews and for guests. Note that we do very few book reviews because they're time consuming, so you really got to wow us. Just saying, "Hey, I wrote a book and here's what it's about" isn't going to cut it. Tell me why I need to read this. Um Otherwise, if you're pitching yourself, differentiate yourself. Tell me why we want you on the show. Why are you going to be an amazing guest? Why are you hilarious? And mention your pets because you'll get to Shelley quickly. Uh, that's indiebooktalk.com. Do not pitch us on social media. We will miss it and just email you and say, or message you and say, please pitch us on the form. So don't waste your time. Just go directly to the forms. Yeah. Happy pitching. Good luck.
Thanks.